Hi, I'm Mark, the Family Woodworker. Today we're going to do an unboxing, first test, and review of this VEVOR 5-gallon vacuum chamber with some pretty disturbing results at the end. Stay with us.
Oh, it's a disaster.
Many of my smaller wood projects sometimes use epoxy, but I don't have a way to completely remove the trapped bubbles from the mix. Now, with a larger walnut and epoxy lamp project in the works, I needed my epoxy pour to be bubble-free. It was finally time to invest in a vacuum pump and chamber system. This isn't normally a tool you can find on the shelf at Lonard's Depot, so the interwebs will just have to do. Prices vary even though the features between the brands are mostly the same, but I opted for a 5-gallon pot and vacuum kit from VEVOR for just over $150. My Amazon box had a nice dent in it, kind of like my wife will tell you I have a dent in my skull, but no damage was actually visible inside the box. The tempered glass lid is 12 millimeters or almost a half an inch thick and feels pretty heavy on its own in order to make a good seal. The vacuum gauge and control valves come pre-assembled, which makes life a little easier. The kit also comes with a tiny silicone pad to catch any overspills from what I'm assuming is a project about the size of a small shot glass. The pump comes fully assembled and fit nicely into some extra dense foam inside the pot in order to prevent damage. The single-line vacuum hose also came with fittings attached and were ready for connection. Also, a feature not found with all vacuum kits was the synthetic pump oil that needs to be added before first use. Finally, the 5-gallon stainless steel pot provides an inner working area at 11.5 inches wide by 11.5 inches deep, large enough for most of my wood and epoxy-filled projects. Aside from river tables and desks, that is, I do love me some of that crack. Tree trunk crack, that is. The assembly instructions weren't great, but they were easy enough to read. Sort of. I dig the component breakdown picture at the top of the page that you can't even see with a magnifying glass. Since the connections were based on basic plumbing knowledge, the core assembly of the control valve to the glass top was pretty easy. Sealing washers go against the glass surface top and bottom, and then the stainless washers are used for compression. Install the steel washer over the fitting first, followed by the white rubber sealing ring. Insert carefully through the tempered glass top, and then repeat the washer assembly on the other side of the glass. Rubber against glass, and then steel washer, and then finally the brass nut. The nut is designed to only tighten so far on the threads and then seat, leaving the valve to feel a little wobbly installed on the glass. That appears to be on purpose. Too tight of a connection to the metal against glass and you're shedding tears while sweeping up shards from the floor. The soft gaskets actually make an airtight seal, so no worries there. The connector hose comes with textured ends specifically designed for hand tightening only. You can see a small white plastic insert on each fitting that will help to make the seal. Avoid the natural desire to crank on this fitting with any tool, as it'll damage the ability to seal the line. On the pump side, unscrew the fitting cap and then connect the hose the same way, hand tightening the fitting until seated. At the very most, you might use some pliers to help snug up that fitting, but never crank it down hard. One of the things not found in the assembly instructions is the mandatory filling of the oil reservoir before you start the pump. You'll see the pump oil procedure mentioned in the maintenance instructions, but it was never part of the first assembly instructions. That whole tiny little detail is worth noting because you should
never let the pump run without oil.
The small bottle of pump oil was added to the fill opening, and it took the entire contents of the provided bottle to get above half full, meaning that I should probably get another bottle to have on hand. With that little detail complete, we're ready for a first pressure test. But wait a minute, what is that? Another little detail not in the instructions. There's a little rubber cap on top of the pressure gauge that needed to have the tip snipped off. Doesn't tell you why you need to perform this circumcision, but there you go. With the glass top and rubber seal clean and free from dirt and the lid centered on top of the pot, it was time for the first pressure test. The blue valve on the pump side was opened, and then the opposite valve was closed off. With the pump turned on, nothing appeared to be happening at first, but then again there was 5 gallons of air that needed to be purged before any vacuum pressure could build. I let the video run in real time so you could see when the negative pressure started to indicate on the gauge. I also kept pressing on the lid as if it needed that, but the vacuum started to kick in anyway. It took a couple minutes to hit that maximum vacuum, but with the pump shut off and the valve closed to eliminate air movement, the vacuum inside the pot held. I checked it again after a couple hours and the seal was good. With that successful test, I moved on to my large epoxy pour, but took some precaution to line the bottom of the pot with a much larger piece of silicone mat. I cut out a circle of silicone so that it would fit the bottom of the pot, and then inserted my expensive walnut and epoxy mold. At first, I couldn't get the vacuum to start, perhaps the most common complaint you'll find on forums and in product reviews. But I had moved the pump and the pot around my bench a couple of times and left the lid unprotected amid all of my shop dust. So I wound up cleaning the rubber seal and retightening the hoses, and that solved the vacuum issue. As the vacuum pressure rose, bubbles started to get removed from the epoxy. In fact, it worked so well that the epoxy foam started to overflow my mold and run downwards.
I'm glad I put that oversized piece of silicone on the bottom for sure.
All I could really do was let the epoxy cure at this point. Aside from all the bubbles making for a great video, my mistake was not sealing and stabilizing the wood in the pot before casting. All the vacuum really did was pull the air out of the wood, making a huge epoxy mess and a wasted pour. That's my bad for rushing the wood casting process. I ran a quick third test using some non-porous materials like glass marbles and some tinted epoxy. I pre-waxed a small container, filled it up with marbles and bubbly epoxy, and placed it in the chamber. Again, the vacuum kit did a nice job pulling the tiny bubbles out of the mixture. Here it is at 10 times normal speed. I should probably mention here that I'm not sponsored by any tool company. I pay for tools like this out of my own pocket and give you as much of an honest review as I can. Overall, I'm happy with this purchase despite a couple of challenges getting it to seal the second time I used it. As for the detailed specifications, this is a North American setup for a 120 volt motor with an adequate pump pulling 3.5 cubic feet per minute. The brass fittings and valves were of the standard size in case they ever need replacement. The tempered glass top, the gaskets, and the pump oil were all included in this kit. In terms of what I liked, the reasonably low cost was a driver for me to click that purchase button, and although I did find some cheaper options on eBay, I'm never quite sure about some of the sellers there. I liked the quiet nature and the performance of the pump, the whole thing was easy to assemble, the vacuum seal held nicely, and it was great to have it delivered to my door. Not so great? This is more of a nitpick list, but the assembly instructions left me to double check a couple of things before use, like the pump oil situation and no mention of that needed rubber tip snip. The silicone mat was a freebie, but kind of pointless, and the tool is really finicky in that I had to really clean and play with my seals and connections on the second use in order to get the vacuum to take. Overall, this was a needed and useful tool for my shop, and despite a little trouble getting a good vacuum seal, this tool rates 4 out of 5 thumbs. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. Giving us a thumbs up, leaving a comment, and subscribing really helps out our little channel grow. And of course, it's free. Take care.